Okay, thank you. Well, that takes me neatly to exactly the first point that I wanted to make, because my feeling is that the two main parties have rather colluded in maintaining an electoral system that simply isn't fair. But I also think there's a wider collusion, and that is a collusion around what's not talked about. So tonight, when the parties are broadly in agreement with each other, these three, when they're broadly in agreement, they don't talk about things anymore, which means that you can't talk about things anymore, which means that it's left to the smaller parties to come up and say, actually, these things are important, it is time to talk about them. And why do they all hate the SNP so much? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because the SNP is talking about those things that these three parties agree on and don't want us to talk about.
I'm not sure they are.
And it's also, right, and in addition to that, the Green Party is talking about those issues. Now, our membership is 5 times as high as it was last year, and you might come back and say, well, it was probably tiny. But actually, our membership now is bigger than UKIP's, and it's bigger than the Liberal Democrats. And that's because earlier this year, throughout January and February, our membership figures were going up so fast that you could go onto our members' website and you could watch the numbers rising. It was going tick, 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 tick as the numbers rose. That's because young people have joined in their droves. People want change, and you three parties, you colluded. You haven't talked about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which represents a corporate takeover. Within TTIP, there is a regulatory cooperation body which will take decision-making about regulations, let alone Europe, out of the hands of even the European politicians. So nobody's talked about fracking. All three of you agree on fracking, so let's not mention it. But actually, it's one of the stupidest and most dangerous forms of fossil fuel extraction imaginable. And fossil fuel extraction is dangerous in itself. Nobody's talked about climate change. All three of you have signed a really nice piece of paper to say it's just about the biggest threat facing us, but none of you have mentioned it. So let's talk about TTIP, let's talk about fracking, let's talk about climate change, let's talk about the global inequality that is making us all very much less safe than we've been in the past. Let's get to grips with these issues. Now, what would you like from your MP? Well, I can tell you the MP that I think has done most in the last Parliament. I think that Caroline Lucas, the Green Party MEP, has operated a one-woman opposition because the three main parties are so close together in their policies that it took a Green to stand up and introduce the NHS reinstatement bill. It took a Green to stand up and introduce the tax dodging bill. If we didn't have the electoral system that we have, we would have as many Greens in Parliament as the German Greens. And look how different Germany is. Look at the social system, the proportion of public spending spent on for the common good and not for corporations. And let's take the power away from the corporations. The corporations are driving inequality here and they're driving inequality globally. So let's...
Thank you very much.
Let's take that power back and let's use this election to tell these three parties that it's time for change, and it's time for very serious change.
Thank you very much there, Emily. If I can ask now Marcus.
Okay, thank you. Well, that takes me neatly to exactly the first point that I wanted to make, because my feeling is that the two main parties have rather colluded in maintaining an electoral system that simply isn't fair. But I also think there's a wider collusion, and that is a collusion around what's not talked about. So tonight...